name is Tunç Ali Kütükçüoğlu. I will briefly talk about my article titled Misconceptions of Neoclassical Economics and Their Possible Causes. I've already sent this article to an academic journal for pluralist economics education. That was at the beginning of October. I hope it will be published soon. Now it's in the routine review process. You can download this article, the author's original, in the video information, and you can send me your critiques, comments, suggestions by the email indicated in the paper. I will briefly talk about the highlights. These highlights are the summary of this paper, 6 bullet points, and now I will talk about these 6 bullet points. The first point is Neoclassical economics tends to reject all conflicting theories and fields. So it rejects all conflicting theories and fields. You may find this weird, but this is normal behavior, especially for a social science. Now I will read in the abstract. In his influential book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas Kuhn argued that a well-established discipline of science, which is normal science, rejected many socially important problems as metaphysical or as concerns of another discipline. Does it sound familiar to you? I can now read another quote by Thomas Kuhn. In The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas Kuhn describes the attitude of a normal science as follows. Other problems, including many that had previously been standard, like social justice, ethics, epistemology, history, ultimate goals, etc., are rejected as metaphysical or as the concerns of another discipline, or sometimes just too problematic or complex to be worth the time. Does it sound familiar to you in the context of economics? I think they are very familiar phenomena in economics. And I think his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, is a very revolutionary book, which says, fundamentally, we don't have a linear progress in science, because the modern industrial education, the mainstream education, tells us that we have a scientific progress. We continuously improve our knowledge. We understand everything in the universe better and better. But Thomas Kuhn argues that's not the truth. We need to have some ideologies, belief sets, and priorities. And this is how it works. This is how science works. We cannot know everything. For example, take this tree as an example behind me. This is a bay tree or laurel tree. In Turkish, defne. In German, Lorbeer. We could spend our lifetime, the whole society could spend its lifetime to understand this tree, every detail of this tree, and we wouldn't be able to understand 1% of this tree. So complex with its structure, chemistry, biology, interactions with the environment. We wouldn't understand the whole picture, so we need to have some priorities, some focus. And our priorities and focus depend on our ideology or belief sets and what's important. For example, do we need to understand this tree, or do we want to develop new technologies so that corporations can earn more money at all possible social and ecological costs? Or do we need to understand ecological agriculture, for example, for a better sustainable agriculture. So we need to have some priorities. So the first point was neoclassical economics tends to reject all conflicting ideas. Second point, this rejection may come in different forms. Mental or institutional barriers, omissions, undervaluation, belittlement, or sometimes even outright hostility. And that's the funny part. I can read in the article what kind of rejections we have. Conscious or subconscious, I think mostly subconscious. Ideological or institutional, in form of omission, ignoring, exclusion, undervaluation, belittlement, discrediting, sometimes even willful ignorance, contempt and hostility, especially if much more than a scientific argument is at stake, like social order, privileges, careers, and money. In such cases, ostensibly scientific arguments become mere political tools for displaying on which side one stays. For example, I experienced similar things during my PhD study. I have a co-director who doesn't like phrases like stealing wealth from local communities and future generations. He doesn't want that I use such sharp phrases, and also he doesn't want that I criticize some corporations. He told me that he didn't like such critics, and I asked him why. He couldn't explain me it in a scientific sense, but I guess either he doesn't like it personally because he believes in economics as a benevolent and objective science, or maybe he thinks he would then have some institutional or career problems. I don't know. That's only guess. Third point, this paper summarizes neoclassical misconceptions and their causes in a structural way. The structure is a table on page 7. Here, you can see, I hope, the table. I can read you some examples for these misconceptions, and you can think if they are familiar to you. Monetary reductionism, measuring everything with money and ignoring non-monetary production of nature and society. As if we wouldn't have a non-monetary economy. Growth obsession, this is GDP growth, as if growth is a perfect proxy for well-being, and as if growth were a perfect ultimate goal of the whole economic policy. Technological optimism, or technological fundamentalism, as if we could solve every kind of social and ecological problem with technologies. So we don't need to change the system. We don't need to think about social and ecological problems. We just need to develop new technologies. A very convenient belief or misconception for corporations and their investors. Ignoring imperialism, which means ignoring that we have a global economic system with winners and losers, ignoring power relations as if we have a fair game in the whole economic system, and the whole economic system is a kind of benevolent infrastructure. So, free markets, premature mathematization, overuse of quantification and mathematics in abstract theories. This is also sometimes called inverse fitting. Not fitting abstract models to nature, but the reverse, fitting nature and including human nature into abstract formulas using weird assumptions. Ignoring or underestimating externalities, as if externalities were exceptional cases. Normally we wouldn't have any externality, but in some exceptional cases we would have some externalities. So we have, for example, the chapter for externality always at the end of the textbook. Free market fundamentalism, so free and competitive markets would solve every kind of social and ecological problem, including unemployment, climate, poverty, everything. Social science, so designating economics as a social science. Why should it be a social science? It should be a holistic human science, covering all necessary fields so that we can see the complete picture. So we should include also natural sciences, like evolutionary anthropology, ecology, physics. Physics is also important to understand how to use mathematics, for example. Consumerism, belief that human well-being can be improved by proper combinations and amounts of market goods and services. Ignores non-monetary and qualitative, in most cases social and ecological, factors of life quality. Pricing everything, for example, attaching monetary values to ecosystem services, as often done in environmental economics, which is actually a branch of mainstream neoclassical economics, etc. Fourth point in highlights, most neoclassical misconceptions and barriers can be explained by the lack of ecological literacy. Lack of ecological literacy means ecological ignorance. I mean here ecological literacy in the broad and deep sense, which also covers anthropology, history of human societies, civilizations, for example. And in fact, if you check the list of neoclassical misconceptions, you see that most of them are related with ecological ignorance. For example, monetary reductionism. If you have some ecological literacy, you realize that we have a non-monetary economy. Nature is the primary producer, for example, and we have also non-monetary economy within societies. So the production is not only about monetary production. So if you have some amount of ecological literacy, you don't fall into the trap of monetary reductionism because you would be aware of the fact that we have a non-monetary production as well as monetary production. And we can shift the production depending on the economic policies. Similarly, with technological optimism or fundamentalism, if you have some ecological literacy, you realize that we don't have only corporate or human-made technologies. We have also technologies of nature, for example, photosynthesis, the most important production technology we have by plants or planktons. Or we have giant technological systems like the marine ecosystem. Very complex, with very complex cycles, and marine ecosystem produces for us every year, if we don't destroy this ecosystem, millions of tons of fish, among thousands of many other things. Ignoring imperialism, similarly. If you have some ecological literacy, you would have global view to the economy, including ecological factors, not only human-made factors, business realm and money. So then you realize that we have, through complex relationships, winners and losers, exploiters and exploited, etc. Fifth point in highlights, foundational barriers. This means barriers to improvement, barriers to a more holistic view. Industrial paradigm, which is the mechanistic and reductionist worldview since Industrial Revolution. This is the machine world paradigm in contrast to living world or organic world paradigm before Industrial Revolution. There's a very good book about this paradigm shift, The Death of Nature by Caroline Merchant. The Western ideology of progress. This is in fact a kind of racist ideology because it thinks we, the Western people, white people, are progressed people. We have a higher and better civilization than all other civilizations. We have a higher, better civilizations, and all the other civilizations are lower, more primitive, and almost barbarous civilizations. And there's only one way to go, one way for real progress. This is economic development and growth in the neoclassical sense. Ideology of progress. And its modern manifestation, economic development. And its historical manifestation was bringing civilization to backward nations and civilizations. Business interests, these are generally short-term and narrow interests, monetary interests, and ideological literacy. So these are the four main pillars of neoclassical economics. This is my opinion. Industrial paradigm, Western ideology of progress, business interests, and ecological ignorance. Finally, the last point, the sixth point in highlights, understanding all kinds of barriers, institutional and ideological, is essential for devising a better economics education that can overcome all these barriers. Let me read you a paragraph, a suggestion from the conclusion, and I wonder what you would think about it. You can send me your ideas by email. It may be interesting to see how economics departments would react to the following suggestion. All economics students must have a solid background in mathematics, physics, linear and nonlinear dynamic systems, ecology in the deep and broad sense, including evolutionary, social and biological anthropology, philosophy of science, also history of science, history of economics, philosophy of economics, history of economic thought, and so on, before learning economics with its multiple schools, and before learning micro and macroeconomics. Only with such a broad and solid background, doesn't need to be very deep in a certain field, just solid and broad background on all these fields: physics, ecology, anthropology, history. Students can begin to learn economics in a critically active way. At least 2 years of university education must be dedicated to these fundamental disciplines.